What does it mean to build a brand? It's not a logo or a product or even a promise to anyone. It's about creating a unique and lasting image. It's the ability to align what you want people to think and what people actually think. In today's episode, I got the chance to talk with Jordan Lyle, a multi-disciplinary designer originally from Jamaica whose ability to problem solve and ask the right questions has made him a highly sought after creative director who's worked alongside a ton of major brands. We'll hear how after years of working in commercial production, Jordan took the ultimate step into entrepreneurship by developing, designing, and launching his very own brand, and how he's able to create a brand of goods and content with an emphasis on quality and thoughtful design from a Black perspective.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Some people say you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and to surround yourself with people who are better than you. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. My name is Matt Connolly, and this is Better Than Me, a podcast where I get the chance to talk to artists, creators, entrepreneurs, and the people who inspire me about how they got to where they are today and what inspires them. As an artist with many talents, Jordan Lyle's ability to work in graphic and motion design, photography, typography, pitch development, curation, and writing has given him first-hand experience in being a creative problem solver for huge brands like Google and Apple. But what happens when you become the brand? What does it mean when you put yourself and who you are into the thing you're creating? It brings up the conversation about legacy and what you're leaving behind. When developing his brand for the Culture Club, Jordan set out to develop something that represented his perspective by activating all of his skills into a project that is the next chapter in the legacy he's creating for himself. But like with anyone's legacy, it all starts somewhere. And for Jordan, where he grew up didn't automatically lead him to where he is today.
I grew up in Kingston, Jamaica. I'm from Jamaica. And my life in Jamaica had nothing to do with where I am now. It's funny. There's something very specific about being from the Caribbean. You always get kind of lumped into a few specific career paths. You're either like a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an architect, and like those are the main ones that your parents ascribed value to. It's like a traditional thing, but I think very early on I knew I did not want to follow that path. Like that wasn't necessarily success for me, you know?
Yeah.
So I left Jamaica when I was 15. I got accepted to an international like boarding school.
Oh.
I was kind of like, representative of Jamaica for a few years as I finished high school.
Where was the boarding school?
In New Mexico. I actually lived in a castle
cool.
for 2 years.
What? Why was it in a castle?
It's called United World College. It's
that's cool.
A group of 10 schools, I think more now, that are just kind of like placed around the world in pretty remote locations. And it was like Hogwarts. Yeah, I mean, like we had the grand dining hall, like wooden Chihuly sculptures, like in our
That's
dining
crazy.
hall and stuff. Haunted, all of the above.
Completely opposite from Kingston.
Yeah, like nowhere near that experience. Yeah. But I think when I was there, I did the international baccalaureate and I did high level art. I had this amazing teacher, Colin, a guy from South Africa, who was a watercolor painter. And he was just pushing me so much to do something creative. And I had always been creative, but I had never thought about it as, a viable option for a career or, anything to do with life beyond high school. And I wasn't even too sure what that option was yet, but it's just like, do I really want to write books for the rest of my life? Like, yeah. I was really big on anthropology, did not want to write a book at all. Chemistry, terrible at it. So I was like, let me find something that I'm good at. And I think I'm a pretty analytical person and I like, problem solving and for things to make sense. But also too, there's like a really deep-seated creative thing here. Yeah. So those two mixed together and like the combination of those things was like advertising for me. That was my solution.
When Jordan's art teacher handed him a pamphlet for SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, it felt like the perfect choice for pursuing a career in the arts. But he still had to cover his bases and apply to other schools. Jordan got accepted to multiple other colleges and even applied to and got accepted to Stanford. But Savannah College of Art and Design was still his number one choice.
I pitched to my parents, hey, I would love to go to SCAD. And they're like, you can't go unless one, you get a scholarship, two, whatever you're going for makes sense.
Right.
And so that's what we landed on. And, the rest is history. I'm here.
Did they push back at all? Like, I mean, besides those requirements, were they like, if you're saying the Caribbean, they have such a path of like doctor and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Were they like,
I think my parents have always been supportive. So, they have their way of thinking, but
sure.
I think they had faith in my potential. And if I said I wanted to do this, and I put a lot of research into it. So they really didn't have a reason to not want to go with it.
There is a recurring theme in Jordan's life of him putting a plan in place and executing on that plan. Going to the school of his choice was the beginning of a list of carefully made decisions for Jordan to put himself exactly where he wanted to be. Coming towards the end of his time at SCAD was when Jordan began looking towards what was next and how he would transition from student to designer.
My first internship I had with Brand New School, which was dope. I met Chris Palazzo, who was an art director at the time at BNS in New York. I saw him at the career fair, and he looked at my portfolio, and he was like, all right, yeah, dope. Like, come to New York this summer. See you there. Yeah. The following year, I met the Wills from GS.
This is Gentleman Scholar.
Yeah, Gentleman Scholar. At a conference that we had, a student-led conference called Commotion that we had at SCAD. And yeah, me and my friend Joe Ball, shout out to Joe, we pitched ourselves as a duo. We're like, if you take one of us, you have to take the other one. Oh, nice. And we had an internship with them. And then right after college, actually right before I actually left school, I graduated 1 quarter early. They offered me, like a tentative position to come out and spend some time in LA. And that's where it started. And I was super excited. Like GS at the time was one of it was like on my list, like number one. And I was super grateful. I'm so grateful that I had that experience.
And they were pretty new right then.
Yeah. And I think that was what was exciting to me was, there's a nerves behind entering or, like the working world. But I think it was also such a new experience for everybody. And like the team was growing that it did feel like, oh yeah, like, I mean, I feel like I fit here. Like this, I'm growing, they're growing, like we have a common goal. Like, yeah, I feel like the sparks are sparking.
Yeah. Like we're doing this all together, kind of building something.
Right. Yeah. And I started off as a designer animator. So when you have such a small team like that, everybody's doing everything. Yeah. All hands on deck. So that was fun.
You obviously worked at Gentleman Scholar for quite a few years. What was it like going from, starting as an intern, starting as a designer and everything like that, and then transitioning into a position of leadership, like a creative director?
Mm-hmm. So for that, I mean, that had always been my goal and trajectory, It's probably one of my strong suits is I tend to know what the game plan is before I start something. It's like I know where I want to end up before I start it. And so it kind of, I got put on this somewhat of an accelerated schedule to leadership because that's kind of where I fit in. I like people. I like to communicate and I like to problem solve. So I think in the positions that we're in, it's like having a technical ability, but also having, the mindset behind dealing with clients and, freelancers and just everybody, just being a part of the group. It was kind of like the natural progression of things. And I think like when you're at a studio, you're on that different microscope. Like you're at a studio because they're trying to like position you. They're trying to like, how do you fit into the box that we're creating? And like, oh, well, maybe let's reshape your box to be this thing. And oh, here's how you can elevate the size of this. And, I think as a studio grows, they want to make sure that whoever is on their team is also growing maybe at the same rate or even faster than theirs, so that there's less turnover and more growth. So, but it was, fun. Lots and lots of projects.
It's almost impossible to talk about brand without talking about the concept of design. And I was curious to know what being a designer meant to Jordan and what that process looks like when starting a project.
I think being a designer for me is all about communication, and it's about effective communication, not just with words, but, with how you can tell a story through visuals and how you can communicate whatever, the goal is through a visual medium. And for me, like, as I've said before, storytelling and problem solving are huge on my list. Like, I love getting a brief and like dissecting it and finding out like, oh, well, is this what they want? Like, what are they actually asking here? How can we represent this? And that's the exciting part for me. And so that part of my process is taking on those questions and sitting with the brief. And then I give myself time to just step away from it. I know many designers especially have this process, but I think about it, I pull some references, and then I kind of just go for a walk. I go for a walk, watch some videos on YouTube or something. I let these invisible connections form. Having done this for 10 years, there's so much that you've already stored. And it's almost like, your mind just begins to recall certain things, and you make different connections, and boom, after a few hours, I personally might be at a place where, okay, this makes sense. Like, this correlates to this, and this is maybe what they want. And I remember this image, and then I jump into it.
It feels easy now to say, like, it feels natural and almost instinctual, right? But like when you first started, did you always have that? Or do you feel like you had to build that up a little bit?
I think I had elements of it, but it definitely was nowhere near what it is now. It's like, I would say over time you develop your process, right? But I think in the early stages of being a designer, I knew some of the elements. Like, of course, you have to do your research. I think I've always been good at dissecting the brief and trying to understand what's being asked. But I didn't have any laurels to rest on early on to say like, oh, let me go step away and not do something for a few hours and then like bust out some work.
It's like the ability to ask the right questions feels underrated. Yeah,
and that's really what it is. It's over time you just know what questions to ask to get the result, and that's a good revelation, because that's essentially what it is. You're asking yourself and asking others, like, you said this, but what is it really that you're asking?
Asking the right questions can be crucial in knowing the path forward. And that's especially true for yourself when you're looking at what your next move in life will be. After working with Gentleman Scholar for 4.5 years, Jordan decided it was time to take the next step in his own career and began looking to become a freelancer. But how do you go from staff member to freelance artist smoothly?
Essentially, I just started leaning on my network, with that multi projects I had already done. I had met amazing people like you, other freelancers who had been working there, building and having a good relationship with people who I had worked with really made it a lot smoother, made the transition a lot smoother to freelancing.
Was it more nerve-wracking starting at GS or going freelance for the first time?
I would say going freelance was more nerve-wracking, because you go from comfort zone to the unknown,
Yeah, you're working every day to maybe I'm not going to work tomorrow.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was ever I don't know how this is going to sound, but that was never really my concern. My concern was more so like my reputation of whenever I do go to places. It's like, I love that. What happened with me is, I don't know how specific it was, but when I was leaving, I had reached out to Justin Cohn, who also went to SCAD. Yeah. And I had worked with Justin on a few other things, more as a volunteer. He did the F5 conference in New York, which is part of the motionographer. And I was a volunteer there like years before that. Kept up that relationship, and I was like, hey, Justin, any advice? I'm going freelance. And he's like, what, are you going freelance? And thankfully, and I'm super, super grateful for this, but he put me on motionographer as Jordan Lyle is going freelance.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like that set me up for success.
That's incredible. Yeah.
And so, but what came with that was, okay, cool. Well, I feel like I have enough of a reputation and I'm in good standing with a lot of people. So now when I go to these places, I've never worked outside of like the construct of GS and that workflow. What is a workflow at BNS going to be like? What's a workflow at Buck going to be like? What's the workflow here? And I think having to adapt and also try to meet the standard that I set for myself everywhere else, not knowing any of the systems at all, I think that was more nerve-wracking for me.
A couple of years after freelancing, Jordan set out to develop his brand for the Culture Club. But what does it really take to create something from nothing? Taking an idea and developing that into something with meaning and that people can get behind is a challenge. Luckily for Jordan, he's a man of many talents, and it would require all of those to launch for the Culture Club. And I wanted to know what led him to take on this challenge and what it took to achieve it.
I had always wanted to do something physical. Like, you know, we spend so much time looking at a screen and day in, day out projects. And one thing that was such a huge gripe for me was we work on projects for like 2 months and it has an airtime of like 2 weeks. And you're like, what did I just do in my life? And it's, I think, particularly for me, I like to work on things that have some meaning, some personal meaning to me, beyond just like the satisfaction of designing something cool or, you know, because after a while, your priorities change. And a priority for me was about the legacy that I was creating and like, you know, what was I leaving behind in the spaces that I occupied.
Yeah.
And as cool as they are, like a car commercial is not what I want my legacy to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so that led me to, you know, how do I use all of my skill set and all the things that I'm good at to create what I want, like to create my legacy. And so I leveraged, you know, the problem solving, biggest thing. I leveraged, you know, being a designer, and I think I'm a relatively good designer. So that part came easy. I didn't have to ask anybody to design anything for me. But then I also leveraged, you know, just all the other things that were supplemental to my career, like photography. I had picked up a camera a few years like into designing, and then it just became part of like my language. I saw the world in a different way. And then I was able to just utilize that in all areas of the brand. Another thing is writing pitch decks. The words came so easily, you know, because as an art director, that's kind of what you do. You curate these pitches and decks, and I love like defining moments with words. Like words are really important to me as well. And so all of those things together led me to the start of For the Culture Club, which is my brand. It's a brand of goods and content with an emphasis on quality and thoughtful design from a Black perspective, being a Black man. I think I use this brand in some ways as a portfolio. And it's a portfolio that nobody can criticize except me. You know?
Right.
It's like, if you like it, and it's just, I mean, that's the same thing with any brand. Like, not everybody likes Nike, but Nike doesn't necessarily care about that. Like, they're only focused on the people who are for them. You know? And I think in the same way, it's like by me putting my perspective in a different format and medium, it's, if you rock with this and if you like this, then perfect. Like, be a part of this community.
Touching on that a little bit more, actually, it feels like a big part of what you're doing is building a community. And I think you've maybe even said that before, but it feels like a huge aspect of For the Culture Club.
Yes, it absolutely. When I was at SCAD, like the Black designers at SCAD were like, you could look across campus and see all like 7 of us, you know? And so I think, you know, at that time being new to design and not having, you know, a real place to look at for like an example of what, you know, being Black in design is, you kind of just like started that path for yourself and you were with your friends forging that own path. So, you know, 10, 12 years later, I think part of my passion and purpose is to represent like the possibility of design and like how design can be more far reaching and have an impact in even small ways. If you see a nicely designed t-shirt, you're like, oh yeah, I want that shirt. And you might think it's like a super high-end brand or whatever it is, like whatever the product is. And sometimes I wasn't of the impression that Black people saw themselves with nicely designed things, you know? And so I was like, oh, well, I am Black. I am a good designer. Here's where I can bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, I'll design some really nice stationery, or here's a duffel bag or tote bag or t-shirt that bridges the gap between what is significant to my community culturally, like the language, all those things, but also to like, here's an elevated aesthetic of that. And this is for you. And here's how this could look. So that's kind of how I've treated the brand.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's, you forget that people attach their own thoughts and things to a design.
Right. And I love that you said that, because that has been one of the most interesting thing about starting a brand, is that you're literally nobody until somebody determines that you're somebody. And so that has been an interesting thing for me to see, you know, with the support of friends and people I know, but also just strangers who are so willing to wear and represent something that started as an idea for me and something that was of intrinsic value for me. That has been like beyond.
When Jordan started For the Culture Club, the first thing he designed and released for the brand was a set of pins, and he admits he obsessed with getting them perfect. With that initial step done, For the Culture Club now offers bandanas, bags, hats, t-shirts, and sweatshirts, along with a growing community. But where do you go from there? How does the brand evolve?
Something that I think about is, I'm not a clothing designer. That has never been a thing for me. It's like, I want a physical product and I want to create a legacy. And I have a point of view, and that's not limited to clothing. So I think a next step for me is, how do I place myself in other design spaces with the skill set that I have? You know, I like solve problems. Can I solve a furniture problem? Can I solve an ergonomic problem? Can I solve like a sustainability issue? And inherently part of the brand is coming from my perspective as a Black person. So that also enters whatever space I enter. So if I design a shoe, it's going to be with a certain flair and flavor to it, you know, coming from all of the things I've collected and, you know, references and experiences that I've had, which will make it unique to me, but important. And then, boom, that's a part of my legacy. What's the next thing that I can spread my design knowledge around?
With Jordan focusing more and more on his own brand and company, I was curious how he felt when returning to commercial projects. I know as I continue on with my own career, the idea of influence has become more of a factor in deciding what projects I take on. It's often less about what's the next cool project and more about what impact you can make on something. Sometimes the loss of enthusiasm for a project that to others can seem like a dream gig can be viewed as being jaded. And I was curious how Jordan felt about this.
I think you're at a point where you understand what your priorities are. And, you know, like, if you're a professional, like we're all professionals, we've been doing this for such a long time, that the same thing that, you know, excited me when I was just starting is, I hope that I'm not excited about those things right now, because it would have meant that I'm kind of stuck in the same place. Based on hearing what you just said, like, we're at a place now where we need to be excited by different things based on where we are in life, like different priorities. A word that gets passed around a lot in just my group chats. I'm, you know, a few of my closest friends, we all are designers. All of us went to SCAD as well, and we're all Black. But like, equity is something that is big, you know, like now when you go on these projects, you want to feel as though you have some stake in it, you know, not necessarily from like a financial standpoint, but you know, what you just said is like, how much influence can I have on this? Like, what part of me is gonna be left behind in this process? And how much ownership do I have of, you know, the process or the final result? And those things are important. And then I think when you realize like, oh, this is not necessarily like going to play out in the way that I want it, you're able to dissociate yourself from having to put as much of yourself into it. You're like, I'm still gonna do my best or do well, but I'm placing more emphasis on the things that are more equitable and the things that serve me more.
There is something so crucial in finding out how you value yourself and value your input and influence on something you have a hand in creating. As we grow as artists, it's important to reevaluate what you find important in that process, whether that's collecting a paycheck or having creative input into the final product. No matter what industry you're in, it almost always involves collaborating with others. And like any artist that has found success, Jordan's advice to aspiring creatives is something we've definitely heard before, but it is important to continue to say.
Be somebody who you would want to work with. Be a person who is not an asshole, like is not a jerk. Because technical ability can be worked on, but you cannot train somebody to be more likable or to be like better team player. I mean, you've been in situations before. I've been in many situations where like somebody could be so good, like so amazing at what they do, but if I don't want to work with you, then I just don't want to do it. Yeah. And everybody suffers in that scenario. So great personality, great work ethic, ask the right questions. And sometimes it's part of it. Sometimes you're going to have to do some stuff that you don't want to do, but I think the harder part is like sitting and brooding about it. How you can change that is like understanding that it's a part of the process. Yeah. And at some point it will become something that you won't even think about.
On top of that, Jordan has mentioned before about how important it is to find your tribe and build a community. And I definitely agree that if you don't have that support system of peers, it's worth going out of your way to find those people.
I think Issa Rae, she said like you network across, not up, not always up. Because those are people who are also in a similar position. Like everybody's trying to build at the same time. Yeah. And we're utilizing our own skill set and creating our own support system. So by the time when we get to the next platform or plateau or whatever it is, it's not like one person is leaps and bounds ahead and you feel, not in the same tier or category, but everybody can feel supported at the same time. I think that's important.
When speaking with someone about my own career, they were trying to understand what it is that I do. 3D character animator didn't give them enough info. So they asked me what project I've worked on that I was most proud of. I honestly struggled to find an answer. At that point, I had worked on hundreds of things. Commercials, movies, game cinematics. It wasn't just one project. It was the collective of sustaining a career for so many years that gave me the ability to work on so many different creative projects. But like with anything, that answer would change if you asked me today. When talking to Jordan, who is a person with so many talents and with such an impressive resume and portfolio under his belt, it would seem easy to try and pick one of those projects or even choose his own brand as the thing he's most proud of. But there's a reason Jordan is where he is today, and it's a certain quality that has gotten him there.
Whenever I do end up in like a tight spot, or if I do end up in a situation where I feel uncomfortable or, where I feel like I need to grow, I think I recognize that pretty early on. And I feel adept enough to be able to navigate around those things to what the next step is. And it comes with practice. It comes with having the parents that I have who are, my mom is dealt in human resources for a long time. Yeah. My stepdad helps to, they both do this. They help to like restructure companies, and it's all about people and process improvements and stuff like that. So I'm always thinking about the process, always thinking about, the problem and how to solve it. So my adaptability and being able to maneuver is something that I'm proud of.
From the outside looking in, it feels as though Jordan has made all the right moves at all the right times, which sounds easy in theory. But most of us are fumbling through trying to figure out what we should be doing. That's not to say it's been easy for Jordan, but he is a person who clearly has an intuitive ability to trust his instincts. I think what makes him such an effective creative problem solver is his ability to ask the right questions, not only to the people he's working for, but to himself. And the ability to extract the value from those answers is a rare quality, and one that Jordan definitely has. I've paid close attention to the moves he's making and continue to look forward to the path he's forging. And as with anyone who's found success, I always want to know what advice they'd give to their younger self.
In the beginning, I placed a lot of pressure on myself for trying to be too perfect at something, trying to be like the best. And it's a little bit of what we spoke about before, is that sometimes like what you give to the process and what you give to the thing, like, it might not be the best. There will be somebody that's better than you, but what you're doing is worth it and you bring value to these situations. And it's okay to not be the best and not be perfect. I think I have adopted that right now, which is, I know I'm not the best at this thing, but it doesn't devalue what I'm doing. It doesn't make what I'm doing less important. It's just me.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. You can subscribe for more episodes wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find us on Instagram at Better Than Me Show. I'm your host for Better Than Me, Matt Connolly, and thank you again to Jordan Lyle, whose brand you can follow on Instagram at For The Culture Club. I'll include his social media and brand links in the show notes, as well as all the music used in this episode. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time.